I want to now introduce two individuals that will be able to bring clarity and great information to what the fund has been doing and will be doing in the coming months. And if I had to go into battle with to deal with the issues that we are confronted with in Baltimore City, these are two individuals that I would want to lock arms with to go into battle with. And so I'm going to introduce our two presenters to you. Many of you may know them already, but I really want to give them a little bit of play here because they have been doing remarkable work. First person on the agenda is Dion Cartwright, and she is the Director of Equitable Initiatives and Leadership Development with the Funders Network for Smart Growth and Livable Communities, where she manages a national fellowship focused on leadership development and advancing racial equity in philanthropy. She was the first volunteer with BCYF, providing capacity building and technical assistance, including applicant support and advisement. She has served as a program officer with the Baltimore Community Foundation, leading the foundation's neighborhood grants program and strategic priorities for neighborhoods. She has over 20 years of experience in philanthropic sector focused mainly on neighborhoods and community development. Next person who I'm going to introduce is a powerful advocate for young people, powerful advocate for justice and racial equity, has been doing great work. I met him but as he has done tremendous work with the Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, a group that he co-founded with Adam Jackson, that's been doing remarkable work. But Dayvon Love is the Director of Public Policy for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. For over a decade now, he has sharpened his oratory and political analysis skills. As a Forest Park High School student, he discovered the world of public policy debate after slipping into a practice session for the Baltimore Urban Debate League team. Listen to this, you all, to keep warm before school began one day. And the rest is history. The brother went on to Towson, got a scholarship there, gained national attention when he and a fellow debater, Devin Cooper, won the Cross-Examination Debate Association National Championship, the first time in history that an all-Black debate team won the tournament. Incorporating hip-hop, poetry, and personal experiences, their debate arguments flipped the script as they underscored how the practice of the debate community pervades the kind of racial inequalities existing in society today. There's much more to say about this young brother. Dayvon is a remarkable, very gifted, talented, and brilliant thought leader. He has been doing tremendous work in this town and across the country, and it just gives me tremendous pleasure, and it's truly an honor to bring these two individuals to you all as they present some information to get us started, and then we'll come back in to basically further chat with them, and then we will invite you in to basically share, or to ask questions that you might have for both of them about the Youth Fund. So without further ado, let me introduce again Dayvon Love and Dion Cartwright. Thank you.
So I want to say, peace family, really appreciative of everyone who is on this program and who will be involved in this program over the next day and a half. Appreciate, Dion for all Dion has contributed to the Youth Fund, and, just a pleasure to be able to do this with you. Looking forward to the conversation with David and Richard. And the way Dion and I decided that we would do this is that I'll share a few remarks to just talk a little bit about some of the history of BCYF, talk a little bit about what some of the accomplishments are. Dion would be able to talk about just her experience in philanthropy, the work that she's done, and where the Youth Fund is looking to go. So that's the way we talked about doing this session. And of course, as Baba Richard said, we do Q&A. That sound right, Dion?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so I'll jump right in. As Richard mentioned, in the BCYF role, I serve as a community engagement lead. But in my work outside of the Youth Fund, I serve as a director of public policy of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. And we actually existed since 2010 and have been doing a lot of work around a variety of issues, but most notably the idea of Black people being able to control the institutions that govern our lives, right? That we live in a society structured on racism and white supremacy, right? That's a sociological fact. That's not conjecture. That's not opinion. That's just the nature of the way that our world is situated. And so that has been something that's been central to our worldview and paradigm. And when the uprising happened in 2015, there was a lot of emergent conversation about racial justice more openly than I think many people had experienced in previous years. And so myself and a handful of other individuals noticed that there was a rush for a lot of people, particularly in the philanthropic and nonprofit sector, to drape themselves in the language and verbiage of racial justice or racial equity, to appear responsive to the moment. And I was clear, and a group of us that include, it's my understanding you'll hear from people like Danielle Terrain, who's currently over at OSI. So people like Danielle, Sam Mellison, that's now at the Burns Institute, Dorcas Gilmore, who's, general counsel of the Youth Fund, Kirsten Allen, who's also on the board. There were some initial conversations that were had around 2015, where we wanted to make sure that we could use the Youth Fund as a way to institutionalize Black people having some control over the resources that are distributed and get them into the hands of folks that traditionally don't get access to resources, right? Which, said out loud sounds like a really simple task, but it's a tremendous undertaking, just given the larger ecosystem that currently is in place that lends itself to, white institutions and dominant society being able to essentially dictate to our community what our community needs. So what I want to do briefly is actually talk a little bit about just some of the history that informs the Youth Fund, like just some of the political and institutional history that isn't, I don't think, talked about often enough, that really should provide a foundation for really putting the Youth Fund in its proper context. So when we think about post-desegregation, one of the things that began to happen is that there were many of the institutions prior to desegregation that were responsible for socializing young people, that were responsible for providing vital services to our community. In many instances were controlled and operated by folks of our community. And what began to happen is that there were major transitions that happened where white liberal elites, nonprofit bureaucrats began to take up the responsibility, and those major institutions began to take up the responsibility of socializing our youth, began to see themselves as being responsible for the development of young people in our community. And in many ways, wresting control of the village that we have had in our community throughout our history away from our community. And that's something, and if we look more specifically, one of the things that actually emerged during the Civil Rights Black Power era, and it's one of those things that isn't talked about nearly enough, is the emergence of the calls for community control, right? Because there was an act of resistance, particularly Black folks within these sectors. There was a call for challenging these major institutions and their attempt to essentially usurp or take over the responsibility of addressing the issues in our own communities. And so one of the things that emerged were community action agencies around the country that are responsible for launching anti-poverty programs. And what's interesting is that those anti-poverty programs around the country actually have the problem of being led by the kinds of bureaucrats that I'm describing. Baltimore actually has a history. Its community action agency was actually heralded by activists nationally as one of the best in the country because its board was resident led. And in fact, if you look into the history of Walter Carter, who at the time was seeking to lead the community action agency in Baltimore, he actually was at odds with the political establishment because he was one of the reasons he was insistent on making sure that residents were in control of the programs responsible for providing these anti-poverty programs. And so one of the things that begins to happen is that many of the elites that begin to take over the responsibility of socializing youth, while they may master the sociology of Black oppression, they began to design programs in ways that see Black people as pathologies that needs to be fixed by white saviors, right? And our ability to talk about this on this platform is particularly important because what I'm saying is not something that's original to me, right? What I'm describing is something that those who are in the sector, who've been doing the work a long time, this is a dynamic that they've noticed in the sector, but have not had an institutional beachhead to be able to substantively address these issues out in the open. So again, this was a part of the reason why for us it was important to seize the youth fund as an opportunity to institutionalize our ability to talk about these issues, our ability to provide resources for those that understand what we believe is the corrective approach, which is that the community needs to be able to have the control of the resources that are used to finance the institutions that are responsible for young people, right? And so that's really for us what the youth fund was an attempt to get at, is putting control of the distribution of resources back into the community's hands. So the community has the ability to be able to meaningfully participate in the distribution of resources so that the village that I think many of my elders remark about as kind of a different world that they used to live in, where there was a level of connection within the community that was just ubiquitous, that was just a natural part of the community that I think many of us would say that has been being lost as a result of many of the forces in our society, an attempt to really use the youth fund as an opportunity to distribute resources in a way that can help reinstill that village, to reinstill the ecosystem of love and care from our larger community in a way that is sustainable. And so what I'll do and end on, just in terms of the history before I pass it over to Dion, is to say that one of the reasons why this notion, why I've emphasized this notion of the way that Black folks are characterized in our society as inherent pathology, because I think our young people are some of the folks, are the folks that I think receive some of the worst consequences of that reality. That our young people often, what is projected onto them is notions of inherent criminality, is notions of inherent pathology that often every day they're having to struggle against. And what we're hoping for is for the youth fund to be able to be an entity that can push resources to those who are serving our youth, that see our young people as gifts to the community, as opposed to criminals that need to be punished, right? And so that really, when we think about the youth fund and the history of it and where we are now, like it is really what I've described as the history and framework that really is the basis for what we want to do with the youth fund. So I'll stop there. I'll pass it over to Dion to talk a little bit about her experience in philanthropy and her experience on the BCYF board as chair.
Thank you so much, Dayvon. That history is so important, and the words that you shared are really important and actually align with what I was thinking about sharing this evening. Before I start, though, let me acknowledge Brother Sadiq. You started off by naming hope, and I like to believe that I'm a seller of hope in everything that I do. So I just want to acknowledge that word. To me is a powerful word. And Brother Baba Richard, and you saying all the children are well, and how that's such a key and critical piece in the work that we're all doing. So I just want to acknowledge both of you. I'm so grateful to be sharing this platform with you all. And thank you again, Dayvon, for kicking us off. I want to start off just sharing a little bit about me and my experience and my perspective, and how that my experience in philanthropy has shaped the way I approach work and engaging with community and with youth. And then I want to connect a little bit about that history of philanthropy to BCYF and why we take the approach that we take. There's a quote by Nelson Mandela that people love to share that says, "The youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow." And that's very true. But I like to say the youth of today are the leaders of today. Today's young people are on the front lines of change all over the country. When you see folks advocating for equality, when you see marches for justice, you see youth leaders at the forefront. When you see what's happening in the world of technology, you see our young people outperforming us all. Our youth today are unapologetically dope. Our young people fight every day to improve the lives of their families, their communities, their society. They're working to change the world by speaking up, standing up for what's right, and fighting the good fight toward justice and liberation. That's what I love about the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. This fund was truly created to ensure our children and youth are healthy, ready to succeed in school, and live in stable, safe, and supportive families and communities. This fund values the voice of Baltimore's children and youth and the communities and organizations that serve them or work in partnership with them. When I joined the field of philanthropy, I was a 22-year-old young Black woman with little to no experience, fresh out of college, new to Baltimore, and just wanting a paycheck to support my needs. I knew I had a love for people, especially young people. I knew I had a love for community and a giving spirit. I knew I was raised in a family of givers and that I had inherited a spirit of kindness and love. What I didn't know was that same love would lead me to a career of serving others, a career that where I could invest in people that looked like me. It was in those early years that I grew my love for youth and communities of Baltimore. I was afforded the opportunity to go into communities, sit with local leaders, hear them talk about their challenges and brainstorm solutions. I was put in a position where I could recommend grants that would support those ideas. We take those ideas and turn them into action. The foundation that I was at was willing to support grassroots community leaders. They were willing to support youth engagement in communities, in schools, in the arts, in athletics, and more. Based on my limited experiences at that time and newness to philanthropy, I thought this was the norm. I quickly realized that it wasn't. Although the concept of giving precedes the institution of philanthropy, philanthropy has historically been a system that is rooted in inequities, and many of the institutions have operated in a way that has fueled those inequitable systems for decades. Instead of the focus being on the people most in need, the focus has always been on investment and the financial benefits to the rich donor. We've been failing our youth, failing our communities, failing those most in need because our focus was not on humanity. Philanthropy seemed to have reinforced inequities more than it served to disrupt it. But things are changing. I'm over 20 years now in this sector, and I'm seeing more foundations acknowledging the inequities that exist in this work. I'm seeing more organizations around the country acknowledge these systems of oppression that we are all operating in and are working hard to change them. I'm seeing foundations invest in more Black-led, Brown, and Indigenous communities more than it ever has. And even with all that, there is still so much more to do. Even with all the change that we are seeing, we're still barely doing more than the bare minimum. The Baltimore Children and Youth Fund is committed to changing that. We have the resources to address the needs of Baltimore City's children and youth. 80% of our funds are granted out in Baltimore City. And in case you don't know, the most philanthropic institutions really only grant out 5% of their assets, a policy that has fundamentally failed our communities. We've granted over $19 million to youth-serving organizations. Those resources served over 20,000 children, youth, and young adults in this city. Even better than that, the majority of our grants have gone to people of color-led organizations, 65% to be exact. And just to give you the comparison, the national average is only 3%. BCYF has led with its commitment to serve Baltimore's children and youth and young adults, but we haven't stopped there. We've been working to change the ecosystem in this city by helping to strengthen the capacity of youth-serving organizations, by offering financial literacy training, by offering technical assistance, leadership development trainings. We have earmarked resources to invest in organizations that would normally get overlooked or underfunded. 35% of our grants have gone to organizations with an operating budget under $100,000. We're centering racial equity in every aspect of the organization. We are engaging and uplifting community voice, youth voices, the voices of people of color. We are doing philanthropy different, and that should be celebrated. So we celebrate our wins. As the chair of the transition board, I can truly say it's our goal to build an organization where its leaders live out our values, an organization where the people of Baltimore are truly served, an organization willing to advocate for and with our children, youth, and young adults, an organization that values the youth perspective, invests in their ideas, and empowers them to lead. We understand that there will always be criticism. There will always be forces that want to see BCYF fail. There will be people that are angry that a Black-led, community-centered, equity-focused organization has access to so many resources. But we plan to thrive in spite of all of that. We hope to be an example to the local and national philanthropic sector on how you can and you should do philanthropy different. We know that our approach lives outside the box of traditional philanthropy, but traditional philanthropy has failed a lot of people. It has often left out those most in need, those battling the biggest obstacles, failing those most impacted by inadequate systems and systems of oppression, systems designed for our young people to fail. We believe this type of approach will create the change we all desire to see in our city and support the brilliance and resilience of our young people. That's BCYF. That's me. I'm going to pause and pass to Dayvon so he can share a few highlights and also tell you a little bit about some of our grantees.
So as Dion said, I want to reiterate, the last slide that was on the screen talked about just some of the accomplishments of BCYF. And I think it's important, when we think about a Black-led effort and we think about just where the goalpost is, where there are very few grant-making institutions around the country that can say that the majority of the grants that they give out are to Black-led organizations, right? That the majority of the workforce supported is Black, that the majority of the board members of what's funded are folks of color, right? And just thinking about those major accomplishments of the Youth Fund, I think are very important as guide stars to where ultimately we want to go even further than that. Just in terms of our ability to have a much greater impact. But in only a few short years, being able to have this impact is something that Baltimore City should be proud of. And one of the things, conversations that I've had over the years, particularly with those in media about, the coverage of the Youth Fund, one of the things that often is frustrating is that our media often doesn't cover the positive things. It doesn't cover many of the amazing things that are happening in our community. So, I was having a conversation with, a couple of years ago, one of the grantees around the Compost Collective. And, a conversation, it was a program the Youth Fund funded where young people are learning how to make compost. And one of the things I remember, so Brother Marvin Hayes, who was one of the people running the program, mentioned to me a conversation he had with young people that were like in the dirt, in the ground. And they had to have a conversation because many of them, their orientation towards Black people tilling the land had to do with slavery. And so just imagine like that level of, so they had to like think about reorienting themselves, right, to the importance of Black people's positive, affirming relationship to the land, to the soil, to the environment, right? That's an example of something. We talk about methodologies that are liberatory, like methodologies that truly empower the community and get at the heart of the resources that are embedded in our community. Like that's a beautiful example, right? Or if we look at Conscious Heads, which is also one of the grantees in the first portfolio, and the Barbering Bootcamp, teaching people, the skill of barbering, right? Giving people the ability to engage in entrepreneurship, right? The ability to learn a professional skill, with a relatively low bar of entry, right? To be able to do the kind of workforce development that can actually get young people that other folks may not be able to reach, right? That's, when we think about for what the Youth Fund represents, like that's a great example of that. Or even we look at Aya and Gria's Eye, the African Youth Alchemy and Gria's Eye, right? And the way that they used, training young people in media production to train them in culturally affirming ways to do media and film about our community, right? Taking people to Africa, right? To the continent of Africa. I mean, very few young people get to have that level of an experience that is so transformational. And again, unfortunately, those stories are not told in the way that they need to be told, right? And so it's our responsibility to tell those stories, which is, again, why I'm so grateful for all of those that are involved in organizing this forum and all of those in attendance, because these are the kind of stories that we need to push forward, that we need to alert the community is happening. Because I think too often one of the things that gets said very casually is, ain't nobody doing nothing, right? That's a phrase that I think people, and it's easy to believe, again, given the larger media landscape, but it's our responsibility to push back against that and let people know the kinds of work that's happening here in Baltimore. I want to give one more example of a grantee, the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum. And one of the things that's interesting about this, even beyond the program they did for the Youth Fund, as I mentioned before, one of the major foundations for what the Youth Fund is attempting to be is exposing the public to forms and methods of youth service that are rooted in the cultural resources of our community, of people of African descent, of indigenous communities and other communities of color, like using those cultural resources as additive, right, as instructive for how we address those who are providing services to our community. I was at a bookstore called Everyone's Place a few years ago, doing my normal thing, looking for books. And I happened to come across this book, Black Experience in Social Work. And I looked at the authors and I thought to myself, I've heard these authors before. And then it clicked. The late Dr. Elmore Martin and the elder Dr. Joanne Martin, who run, the Great Blacks of Wax Museum. But I didn't know that they were social workers and had written, a book published by the National Association of Social Work. And I want to read a passage, just a brief passage from this book, because to me, it was one of the things that I've used this in writings that I produce. But for me, this is something we talk about, like using the cultural resources of our community. Like for me, this is part and parcel of what that looks like. Just want to read it great. So this is a book around Black social workers and the importance and the history of the practice of Black social work. It says, our thesis is that pioneering Black social workers were presented with a great opportunity to incorporate salient elements of the Black helping experience into social work practice, but they opted to take on the middle class or bourgeois outlook of the dominant society and to challenge, even wage war against, Black culture rather than to learn from it. Furthermore, our thesis is that many of the important issues that pioneering social workers failed to resolve in the past because they did not rely on the cultural apparatus of the Black masses are still with us in contemporary society, leaving us with much of the same distorted view of Black life, culture, and history and the same ineffectual instruments of social change. To me, that says everything that I would want to say about the kinds of methods and approaches to providing services to young people, those that actually rely on the culture of peoples of African descent, right, and other peoples of color as a basis for the construction of methods of youth service. And the examples that I gave you are just a handful of examples of the kinds of programs that the Youth Fund is looking to continue to support in order to make sure that we have liberatory practice in the city that can actually do the work of restoring the village that, again, I think many of our elders remember as a crucial part of the fabric that holds our community together. So I'll quickly pass it back to Dion to just quickly talk about what's next for the Youth Fund.
Man, Dayvon, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. I hope y'all are tuning in. I can't see the comments from the public, but I hope you guys are enjoying this real word. I want to just briefly, I know we're gonna have a Q&A coming up next, but I just wanted to share a few things about what's on the horizon for the Youth Fund. We recently celebrated our inaugural year as the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund Incorporated. And next week, we'll be voting on the slate of BCYF's permanent board of directors. Just shout out to the transition board. You guys have been absolutely amazing and diligent workers. I really appreciate all of you. We are weeks away from hiring our inaugural president and recently began the search for additional leadership positions. As part of an aligned grant-making strategy, we partner with the Summer Funding Collaborative to fund high-quality summer programs in Baltimore and have committed to funding those programs that traditionally, again, are overlooked. Those applications are now open and will close December 3rd. So definitely encourage those who run summer programs to apply. We launched the Avis Ransom Institute, a pilot program for youth leadership development that will position young people to be effective leaders in Baltimore and beyond. And we continue to build this organization and really position us to win, position us to be able to support Baltimore's young people in a way that's never been done before. And so I'll stop there, and I look forward to questions from you all and just having an open conversation.
So Dion and Dayvon, thank you. Come on back in the room, Richard. We're going to engage both Dion and Dayvon in dialogue. Want to really thank them for providing both next steps in terms of future direction for BCYF, but also providing a historical backdrop. Always really important, because I think too often people are doing the work but don't necessarily understand the history and the ongoing challenges, particularly the challenges that grassroots organizations are confronted with. So Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we have a couple of really provocative questions for Dion and Dayvon.
We do, but I want to at least urge our participants out there, this is the time to really place in the chat box your questions, because we're not going to have a lot of time, you all. You know, Dion and Dayvon took up all the time that we were supposed to. I'm just kidding. But so this is the time, you all. David and I knew, Sadiq, we all knew that with these two presenters, we wouldn't have a lot of time. So if you want to get at least 1 or 2 questions in, this is the time to do it, because David and I could take this part of the program, we could take it over until tomorrow if you wait for us to stop. So we want to hear from you all, but we do have a few questions that we really want to share with our presenters. Dion and Dayvon, powerful presentation. I'm hoping that folks out there heard you all. I'm quite sure that many listened to your eloquent presentation about the history, about the present, and about the future of the BCYF effort. I am encouraged when I said to everybody at my opening statements, Zapata Ingira. I'm almost certain that if we follow you all and follow where we're going, Dayvon and Dion, we will be able to declare at the top of our lungs, all of our children are well, physically, psychologically, spiritually, economically, socially, personally, et cetera, et cetera. So again, you know, give me a mic, give me the lights, and I will keep going on. So let me ask the question of Dayvon first. And Dayvon, you pretty much have hit on a lot of what this question is about. Because again, your presentation about the history is powerful, but the question is simply this, Dayvon. Why is this fund that is on paper and in its design focus on Black liberation, Black oppression, fostering authentic, real, and enduring racial equity and justice, dynamic youth leadership, radical hope, empowerment, and self-actualization? Why is this important in this city, of all places, today, at this moment?
That's an important question. I think so. 2 ways I would answer that. The first is that one of the things that has happened is I think our society has socialized us to normalize the plantation, right? And so as a result, there's certain conversations, And that is to say that there are people working within institutions that I think are trying their best to extract the resources for our community. But I think we're hitting a place where people are beginning to realize that that's not the North Star. The North Star is, how do we create institutions outside of those mainstream institutions that give people better leverage to hold them accountable and that allow us to actually practice freedom. And so when I think about like the term Black liberation, there are lots of folks that will be fearful of that, right? And there are lots of caricatures that are often projected onto it as ways to delegitimize it as a legitimate approach to doing this work. If we look at the history of people of African descent, you think about like Sheikh Anta Diop, civilization of barbarism. People of African descent culturally have been welcoming of strangers, right? Have been loving, right? Have been folks who are hospitable, to those outside of our communities, right? So we have a history that, when Black folks are in positions of power and leadership, we have a history that trickles down to other peoples as well, right? That Black folks don't have the history. People of African descent don't have the history of European domination of the world, right? And that's just an important historical fact, right? Again, that's not conjecture. That's just an important historical fact. And so I think if we're serious, like people who are serious about improving the quality of life of all people, right, and particularly people of African descent, for my purposes, I think it's important that if we're interested in improving the quality of life of all people, right, that Black liberation is something, particularly in a majority Black city, that it's important for Black liberation to be the frame that is used as the standard for what we're doing. Otherwise, again, we're just participating in normalizing the plantation, which sets a ceiling for what our condition can be that, quite frankly, for all of us should be unacceptable.
Wow. David?
And again, Dayvon, thank you for being always courageous, bold, and honest in terms of framing the conversation, because I think too often, as you said, we kind of shy away from the real issues that our city is faced with. And so, Dion, you have an impressive body of work with the Funders Network. Let's really talk about leadership and share with our audience the importance of identifying, cultivating, funding, and providing the kind of ongoing technical support to many of the amazing grassroots organizations that are already being funded, and the hundreds, literally thousands of other groups that are kind of waiting in the wings. Talk about, from a leadership development standpoint, what are some of the kinds of things that we need to do as a city, as specifically as it relates to grassroots organizations?
Yes, such a powerful question. Thank you so much. And this is something I actually learned really early on in my work in philanthropy. We need to have conversations with people. Historically, philanthropy has taken a top-down approach to the way in which we engage with communities, especially grassroots organizations and nonprofit leaders, community leaders who are on the front lines doing the work. The history of philanthropy has always upheld white dominant culture when it comes to the way in which we engage with community. And so part of the need and the approach that I've taken as a funder and now in helping to shape the youth fund is to really uplift community voice, hear what the people are identifying as their challenges and the needs of our city and the needs of their communities, and investing in those ideas. But it starts with a conversation. It starts with building relationships. It starts with building trust. I used to go sit in people's living rooms, people I didn't know, they were Baltimore leaders. I sit in their living rooms and talk to them about what's going on in the neighborhood and how they want to address those issues. And then I would take those recommendations to my board for funding. And I was funding what the people said they wanted and needed. I wasn't saying this is what you have to do to get my dollar and shaking dollars in front of their face. And the reality is, there in Baltimore City, we have a history of distrust. People do not trust leaders. They don't trust philanthropy. And so, you know, part of the approach has to be building that trust. And the only way that you can do that is by investing in time and relationship with the folks who are doing the work, those most impacted by the systems that we all have to operate in just in this country, but specifically in Baltimore. And so, you know, so that's an approach that's really important. And one of the things that we do that I love about BCYF and Dayvon and other members of the team really are intentional around is providing spaces where we can invest in the capacity, the knowledge base of Baltimore leaders, young people, and people serving young people, young adults. You know, all of them have an opportunity to engage with Baltimore in a way that in the past maybe weren't given the opportunity to do so. And we're putting resources behind that. And so that's just an important thing to do when you're trying to create change. You can't create change by doing the same thing you've been doing. And so our approach is to do it differently, to live outside of that typical philanthropic box. And, you know, it's not easy. We get criticized a lot. You know, we really get criticized a lot, but we've decided to take those punches and to operate within a certain set of values unapologetically. And I think that's one of the things that's going to allow us and position us to succeed no matter what comes our way.
Operate in these spaces unapologetically. Powerful, Dion, because that's what it's going to take.
That's what it's
if we're not going to, otherwise, we'll be back here again 10 years from now, still talking about what we could have done.
Exactly.
And you all, I know you all can see from the gray on my face and in my hair that David and I, we've been at this for a long time. Great beginnings, and we don't make it to the promised land or the finish line because of the lack of courage or for other reasons that we can't get in tonight. There is a question in the chat room, and I'm glad somebody put that in because we were told that our Q&A box was not functioning yet, but here's a question. This forum is amazing. I would like to know how our transportation arrangements made for young people who want to attend the various programs offered by CYF but can't afford to get there.
So the past couple of years, BCYF has funded over 80 organizations. And so all of those organizations that were provided funding, many of them were encouraged to include those kinds of expenses, in their proposals. Additionally, one of the things that happened during the period of the 2-year cohort was the pandemic. So many programs actually had to adjust to virtual in order to provide much of their programming. I think now currently BCYF doesn't have a grantee portfolio in the way we did. We have a line grant making that Dion talked about, with B City, with the Summer Youth Collaborative, et cetera. I think the issue of transportation, and I think I saw this in the chat, is actually a much larger issue, both in terms of transportation equity for the city at large, which the transportation infrastructure in Baltimore, I think it's no secret that it's atrocious, and particularly for young people, there's certainly that not that level of support, and so our hope is that the Youth Fund can help contribute to any efforts that emerge to address the needs of transportation for young people.
Okay. David, I'm going to raise this question to both Dion and Dayvon, and I know you have a question. By the way, Dayvon, you lifted up a number of grantees, man, that I'm in love with. I've worked with. You mentioned the powerful book, and David can attest to this book by these two genius level thought leaders and social workers. The Martins, founders of the National Great Blacks and Blacks Museum. Powerful book, powerful people, great institution. So David has a question for you all that will further look at some of our other grantees. But here's a question I want to pose to both of you all as well, because I think this is what this is all about too. And this question has to do with, again, 10 years out. 20 years out. Aspirational, motivational. These are just, powerful action words. Informational, inspirational, and transformational. These are words that come to our mind when we think of the Youth Fund. And it's amazing possibilities and opportunities. So to each of you all, in 10 or 20 years out, what do you want this fund to have accomplished?
That's an awesome question. I'm happy to go first, Dayvon, and I know that your answer will be powerful. But I'll take the lead. Man, 10 to 20 years out, transformational, inspirational. What was the other word?
Aspirational, inspirational, motivational, and
motivational.
Right.
I love it. All of those things.
All of those, Dion.
You know what? I hope that we have changed the way in which we invest in our young people. As a city, I hope that the way in which philanthropy is done, the way in which we engage with community is different. I hope that 10 or 20 years from now, we can look back at this moment and say, you know what, this was the right decision to change the ecosystem of Baltimore. This changed the way in which we do business, and we've created an example for other folks to replicate, not just locally, but nationally. My desire is that our young people have a true opportunity to succeed in this city, that they're not worried about making it to tomorrow or making it to a year from now, but that they know that they have a long life ahead of them. And that by investing in them and investing in the organizations that serve them, it creates a road to success, a road to an opportunity, a road for them to thrive and succeed. And that's not an easy lift. We know all of the challenges that exist in this city, some of which, are systemic, and until we deal with some policy issues, won't change. But the reality is there are some things that we can change from our position of power. And my hope is that the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund creates the opportunity to do just that. So I'll stop there. I probably could keep going, but I'll stop there and create space for my brother.
So all of that, and the only thing that I would add is just really shifting the thought leadership that's empowered to make decisions in this town. I think one of the things that is important, because I think too often the power of thought leadership, like who's in position to determine what's best practice, who's in position to be able to say, what's effective practice in a certain field. And my hope is that the Youth Fund creates an opportunity for the community to play a bigger role in what is considered best practice. Because again, the community is not the problem. The community is the solution to our own problems.
David?
Yeah, let me jump over to the chat super quickly. Question, are you planning to keep your current funding model in partnership with others, or will you change that in the future? So either Dion or Dayvon, can you respond?
So we are developing, and we have been developing. We're actually in a good place now, but we've been developing tweaks to our funding model so that we can make sure that we are positioning our grantees to thrive. We recognize that there were some things that we could do better. And so, we have made improvements to that and continue to think of ways that we can best support our grantees and not set them up to fail. One of the things I will say, we are standing in our commitment to supporting Black and Brown-led organizations. We are standing in the commitment of giving people opportunities to apply for general operating support, not just programmatic support. We are standing on our commitment to provide capacity building and technical assistance. We are standing on our commitment to spend at least 80% of our budget in grant making and 15% of our budget in administration and 5% of our budget in community engagement efforts. We are committing to that. And that's something that's different than any funder in the city can say that they're doing. Actually, and most funders in the country aren't doing that. And so we're committed to those core values, but we do know that there were some things that we could have done better. We are also creating different levels of funding so that folks who are in different positions can apply to what's relevant to them. So there's just some things that we learned from that first year that we know we can do better. But those core key commitments that we have will remain the same.
Thank you. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 more minutes for this particular portion. If you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat super quickly. Before I ask the last question that I have, Richard, I just want to say publicly to Dion's point about the transparency of the fund, particularly as it relates to community engagement. During the funding process, and when RFPs have hit the street, BCYF has hosted citywide forums. Richard, myself, Regina, and others had a chance to co-lead some of those forums in the past, and literally hundreds of community residents and organizations were showing up to learn more about BCYF and to also influence the process in terms of what's actually needed in community. And that's a new model when we talk about philanthropy. Oftentimes, philanthropic groups don't necessarily go to the community and ask moms and dads, caregivers, aunties, cats standing on a corner, what are some of the kinds of efforts that need to be funded in community? And so I wanted to share that because I think it's powerful when we talk about who makes decisions and how decisions impact funding, particularly on the grassroots level. And so here's a really great question for both of you guys. Can you share a story about a young person or an organization that has received a grant that has dramatically impacted the life of that young person or that grantee?
There are a handful. If I had to pick one, so I actually mentioned this actually be good. So, and him, both of y'all probably know him, Jabari from Conscious Heads.
Oh yeah.
Oh, man.
A brother that's been doing work in the community for many years in a variety of different fronts. And I remember having a conversation with him, because he never even thought to apply for the grants. Like, was never something that crossed his mind. And when he started doing the Barbara boot camp, and just seeing just the natural work that he does with youth, one of the things that became clear to me was that the work that he was doing with the Barbara boot camp was something that can have like impacts that reverberate beyond just, the barbershop. And so two things about what happened after the grant. One was that he actually, because again, my work, for those who know, with LBS, legislative advocacy. And so he actually helped him, but he did the work, but I helped him do the work of passing a piece of legislation that increased the amount of apprentices they could have at once from one student to a master barber to 3, which allowed his barbering boot camp program to be able to serve more people that were interested in becoming barbers, which was huge. And then the other thing I noticed was there's a project that he's actually working on now, where he's trying to start a workforce development program with his barbering boot camp, opening another shop on the west side. And he's currently, trying to raise money with support from Collectively, our brother Jamie Wooten over at Collectively, working to raise money for a workforce development program, full-fledged in West Baltimore, with the Barber Boot Camp at the base of it. So to me, that's, to me, that's just such a great example of, you know, the platform that I think the Youth Fund gave him, along with the resources for him to be able to get that off the ground and to see where he is today. I mean, to me, I think that's a testament to the power of the Youth Fund.
Mm-hmm. And I put in the chat super quickly, for those who are not familiar, check out Brother Jabari Netor Barbering Boot Camp. You can just Google him, doing amazing work in the workforce development space. He's training men and women, teenagers, elders, to help them begin the process of eventually becoming master barbers. So, and he is a current grantee. Amazing. Dion, a young person or an organization that you have a quick story that you believe those grant dollars have really impacted.
You know, this is tough. I'm a board member, so my angle is a little bit different. But I will go with the youth media program at Wide Angle Youth Media. And what I love about Wide Angle is they really put intentionality around telling the stories of our youth from their perspective, and equipping young people to be able to do media production and really get invested in the arts. And it's a story that I love. It's a program that I actually was able to also invest in years ago as a funder at the Baltimore Community Foundation. And that program and those leaders have grown over the years, and it's just one that I'm passionate about. But I will say we have on our website a bunch of grantee spotlights. There's some amazing work happening in this city that folks just may not know about. And we need to change the narrative. And the way that we can best do that is by sharing those stories and by creating space for these young people and these organizations to talk about what they're doing. We know the news and the media may not always want to tell the positive things that are happening, and we get inundated with the negative. And the reality is that there's some amazing things happening that help change the course and direction of the way in which things are going. And so I encourage folks to check out our website, definitely share, and then apply. Like, you know, when we open up the new grant cycle this coming spring, you know, definitely apply, whether you've received a grant in the past or you're learning about us for the first time. You know, this is a real opportunity to make a true investment in your organizations, to make an investment in the young people that you're serving. And we're willing to take the ride with folks. You know, we're not just giving them grants and saying, and go figure it out. We are literally helping people position themselves to succeed. And it's really important. And so really encourage folks to tap in. Dayvon and the team are amazing leaders, as you can see tonight, and you've probably heard in the past. We got a strong group of folks who are helping to run this organization, and just really excited. So I encourage people to engage with us in whatever way, shape, and form you feel is best for you. But we love to have you be a partner in this work.
David, Sadiq has granted us a few more minutes. I'm not sure how many more minutes, but again, we could take this to on and on. We could go on and on, but I know there are folks on the line who looked at the time frame for this session and they saw somewhere around 6:45, 7 o'clock at the latest. So we don't want to disrespect those folks who may have other things to do. Sadiq has indicated 8 more minutes. Let me toss this out, because again, the taxpayers of this city, and thanks to the public servants of the city who saw the vision, or basically moved on the vision of creating this fund, you know, former Mayor Jack Young and some others that we all should lift up as well, for basically moving on this piece of legislation that guarantees this amount of money every year to help and save our young people prosper, thrive, and to survive. 2 questions. I mean, two words that I'm constantly trying to lift up: collaboration and accountability, because these are words that we toss out, they sound good and so forth, but they have little, we know very little about the impact that we are basically having if we don't have accountability metrics or collaboration metrics. So Dayvon, Dion, you all are tremendous in the work that you all do to the board. I know the work. We know this work is hard. We run up against, and Dayvon, we've had this conversation many times, and David as well. Folks trying to undermine, folks trying to stop the progress of this important work. So we need to basically prove to everybody, especially to our young people, that what we say we're going to do, we're going to do it. That's the accountability part. Collaboration part, we talk about it, but seldom do. David and I talk about this all the time. We are still caught up in siloing. Let's do our own thing, because it looks, if we do our own thing, we will get all the credit. Generally, and I tell Sadiq all the time, in the background on my Zoom platform, I have in the background an African proverb. If we want to go quickly, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go together. Yeah. Speak to those two words if you all don't mind. Accountability and collaboration.
Well, I'll quickly speak particularly to the accountability piece, because I think one of the things that made this fund possible was that many of the different parts of the process that created the fund were done publicly, right? Mm-hmm. So whether it was the task force, the initial task force that was convened, that was held in City Hall and open to the public, and at most meetings there were dozens of people present, right? Normally those kind of task force happen in rooms isolated from the public where people can't hear what people are saying. Whether it was the city council process, because it's important for those to really get into the history of the youth fund. Like, this was a charter amendment, right? So, similar to like the United States Constitution, like the charter is what the Constitution to the United States is to the city. And this was the work of changing the charter to carve out resources specifically for this fund, right? And there are in the ordinance that passed that creates the independence of the youth fund, there are a variety of mechanisms for oversight, which include the facts that the meetings of the board are open to are available to the public to watch and observe, right? That every year that the youth fund has to go before the city council, right, for a public hearing for the community to participate in giving its input, that the financial plan of the youth fund has to be presented to the public, right, and that the public has to have the ability to comment. So the youth fund, as it relates to accountability, is the most accountable grant-making institution in the region, right? And that's something that is important both for those who are looking to understand the youth fund to recognize, but also for the community to feel empowered to use any one of those avenues of community input to make their voice heard. And that's something that was intentional in terms of the design of the youth fund.
Beautiful.
Yeah, participatory grant making is not always common in philanthropy because it requires funders to really value the voice of the people. And historically, the approach in philanthropy has been that we know everything. And the community leaders don't know anything, and so and that's the wrong approach. It's incorrect. And so the fact that we have committed to a model of participatory grant making, that in itself is a value that that just really positions us to collaborate with Baltimore city leaders, Baltimore youth, and those serving our youth and young adults. Also, every individual who is a part of BCYF has a commitment to Baltimore and wants to see Baltimore succeed. And there's some intentionality around the makeup of the board. There's been intentionality around the hiring processes that we've created for what will be, soon a new president and a new leadership team and staff. Like, there's been a real intentionality around having Baltimore represented. The people who are being served we live in the same neighborhoods. You know, we go to the same churches or the same grocery stores. You know, this is definitely about engaging with people who really care about the city, and I think it's important to name that. I do want to just in terms of accountability, just also say we're learning a lot about what it means to be a public entity and to be responsible for public funds. And grateful to have partnerships with other organizations in the city that have the same structure in terms of that. And so we've been able to tap into them. We've been able to tap into law departments, the city, like different ones that can really just make sure that we are putting those right systems in place, those systems of accountability in place. We've tried to strengthen our communication strategy so that we can inform the community of everything that we do. You can go to our website and see our meeting agendas. You can see our minutes. There's so much that we're just trying to position ourselves to really do philanthropy different. And of course, criticisms are going to come, but folks got to keep in mind, we actually were building an organization from scratch. And we've been able to do that in a little over a year. Which is something that just is unheard of while simultaneously running a grants program. And so, you know, we appreciate people's patience and grace with us as we've tried to build something that we can all be proud of. But we are absolutely willing and committed to being fully accountable to the people of Baltimore, to our young people, and really committed to the success of this organization.
Beautiful.
Thank you guys. Super quickly, Dayvon, in 30 seconds, I know it's going to be hard. Can you just share with folks the Avis Ransom Institute? And for those who don't know, Avis Ransom was a dynamic person in our city who was doing major work. So can you talk about the Institute, and then we're going to bring Sadiq back up, and we're going to begin to close out with some final things. Y'all don't leave yet. We got some really important announcements. So stay tuned. So Dayvon, 30 seconds.
So the youth fund is required to have a third of its board be youth. So we saw it fit to make sure that we have an institute that will properly train young people, because this is real fiduciary responsibility. This is just an advisory board. This is real responsibility. So the Avis Ransom Institute is something that we've built up. We do it at Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. And so we currently have a cohort of young people that are being trained. If there are folks who are interested in, have young people that are interested in participating between the ages of 15 and 25, folks who are interested in participating, please feel free to reach out to us through the BCYF website. Just feel free to reach out. And we want to make sure that we can get a good, healthy cohort to follow this one.
And how many do you need for the cohort?
So a third of the board is going to be young people. Right. So there's no cap at this point. And so right now we currently have 6 young people who are being trained. But again, if folks are interested in having young people, they have young people that want to participate, please reach out, because we actually want to start getting ready for the next cohort pretty soon.
Okay. And if someone can drop that link, because we definitely want to get some more young people involved in the Avis Ransom Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bring, let's thank Dion and Dayvon. Y'all can drop some applause, send them a few dollars when you see them in the neighborhood, slide them a little something for their hard work, their commitment, and also their honesty about where the fund is and future direction. So ladies and gentlemen, let's put some energy in the chat. Big ups to Dion and Dayvon and Richard for taking the lead and facilitating. Going to bring our big brother Sadiq back up. We got a couple of announcements, and as Sadiq makes his way back in the building, y'all, if you think today was fly, tomorrow is going to be on fire.
Yes, sir.
When you reach out to your little cousin, your grandma, some of them folks that that want to start an organization. We have an awesome agenda. Tomorrow it's going to be a full day. I'm going to turn it over to our big brother Sadiq. He has a few other housekeeping announcements before you guys leave.